This playlist gathers together and organizes the segments of the lecture on the article by Andrew Kuper, More Than Charity, which is a response to Singer's position on world poverty. So we'll start off by learning a little bit about who Andrew Kuper is. Then, because he spends a lot of time sort of sketching out, outlining his positive proposals, and framing his criticisms and locating himself relative to Singer using various ideologies and particular positions, we'll want to make sure we're familiar with that terminology so we understand the intellectual landscape that he's using to help us understand his position and his criticism. So we'll start off by looking at the distinction between cosmopolitanism and parochialism. And these are views about the scope of our ethical theories. That is, what sorts of entities are agents that we need to consider when evaluating the ethical status of rules or actions. The next distinction is all about who the primary agents are that we are going to be thinking about, whose actions and choices we're going to be evaluating in our ethical theories. And the first candidate is statism. And statism, as the name sort of suggests, holds that it's government institutions that are the primary choosers and doers that we should be evaluating when we're thinking about the ethical status of actions about, say, extreme poverty. The next position is individualism, and it holds that the nexus of agency in an ethical theory is the choices and actions of specific individuals. And then his view I call pluralism. He doesn't name it per se, or really clearly define it, but his view seems to be that there isn't one single group of entities that are the primary rational agents that we should be looking at. Instead, he points to three different types of entities: government institutions, institutions of private enterprise, and individuals. And he suggests it's the interaction between these entities, their choices and their actions, that we need to look at and evaluate in determining the ethical status of rules and actions with regard to any particular issue. Finally, there are views about political philosophy. So he talks about neoliberalism, a view about how we should organize society. And then there's socialism, which is a different view about how we should organize society. And then he sort of sketches or proposes a different framework that I call contextual judgment. He doesn't name it again. It's not a full-blown framework. It's a sort of outline of what a framework or what a theory should look like. But I give it a name and talk about what I think he does definitely commit himself to. After we've got all that terminology under our belt, then we're going to turn our attention to his argument, his negative criticism of Singer. What is it that he thinks is wrong with Singer? And this is primarily given to us in the section of the paper called Why Charity is Never Enough. So we'll summarize that argument. We'll talk about how Singer might respond to it, and then we'll look at some quotes from the paper that don't seem consistent with either what he says he agrees with Singer and what he seems to be advocating as his positive proposal as an alternative to Singer. So this is Andrew Kuper. He's a South African businessman. He specializes in what's usually called social impact investing. He calls his approach profit with purpose investing. But the idea is that you're a business entrepreneur, but you're guiding your entrepreneurial impulses by a concern for social welfare. He has a PhD in social and political science from Cambridge University. His two books democracy beyond borders, and global responsibilities, focus on governance in an integrated global economy. Now, together with gentleman Tim Roth, he founded Leapfrog Investments in 2007, and he serves as the CEO of Leapfrog Investments. Leapfrog is a private investment firm. It specializes in providing financial and health services largely to lower income people in Africa and Asia. In 2012, he won the Ernst Young National Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And in 2013, the World Economic Forum named him a Young Global Leader. So he's a prominent international businessman who's got a sort of pro-social investment and business agenda, and who has a PhD and has written and contributed to academic thinking on these topics. So let's look at the first distinction that he draws here, this distinction between cosmopolitanism and parochialism. Now, these are views about how inclusive our ethical theories need to be. Who needs to be taken into consideration? What needs to be taken into consideration in evaluating the ethical status of actions or rules? So on page 108, he defines cosmopolitanism for us. He tells us cosmopolitans broadly agree that the interests of all persons must count equally in moral deliberation, that the geographical location and citizenship make no intrinsic difference to the rights and obligations of those individuals. So cosmopolitanism is going to be an approach that couches ethical theory in a wider context. It's going to embrace a larger community of ethical agents whose interests are going to merit equal consideration. Parochialism, in contrast to that, is going to seek a narrower context for ethical theorizing. And specifically, parochialism is going to try and narrow the scope or the range of individuals that an ethical theory needs to focus on. It's going to emphasize those with whom we share things like geographical location, citizenship, ethnicity. Right? It's going to limit the scope of the number and kind of agents that are going to be relevant in evaluating actions and rules within our ethical theory. He identifies himself and Singer as cosmopolitans within this dichotomy. So he says we both want to think about the community of ethical agents, including people regardless of their geographical location or citizenship, ethnicity, things of that nature. The next distinction that we're going to want to look at is a distinction between statism, individualism, and pluralism. And pluralism is the name that I give to his view. He doesn't explicitly name it. And these are views about what the primary agent is, the thing that does the choosing and the acting that is subject to ethical evaluation in any given theory. And so it's going to identify the primary agents, who or what provides the engine of choice or action within the theory, who or what is going to be evaluated by the ethical theory. And the first candidate is statism. And statism locates the primary ethical agency in the governmental institutions of the nation state. So, for example, statism looks at governmental mechanisms and choices to address poverty. The next view that he identifies is what he calls individualism. And individualism, in contrast to statism, views the choices and actions of individuals as the primary source of ethical agency. It's the choices and actions of individuals that are going to be evaluated for their ethical standing by our theory. Now, he identifies the prevalent current policy orientation in the international community as statism, and he categorizes both Singer and Singer's philosophical critics as individualists. Now, I particularly think that he neither names nor precisely articulates his own position, which is neither statism nor individualism. So I call his view pluralism. And essentially, what I think his view is that he identifies three different types of entities that are agents in his ethical theory, or that should function as the rational or ethical agents within a theory. And those include governmental institutions, the institutions of private enterprise, and individuals. And so the actions and choices of all three of these and their interactions are going to be what we want to look at and evaluate to determine the ethical status of actions and rules within that theory. So there are multiple sources of ethical agency here, and he doesn't assign a set priority to any of them. However, he does weight governmental institutions and market-based institutions more heavily than individuals.